these things, huh, Stacy?
No, we don't. I just
We're being
don't want it to be a problem.
Okay.
Stacy, you're never a problem.
Yeah, you have to turn it on your bottom.
And then turn it on red.
Contact. Kirk the Bridge. Kirk the Bridge. Because you turned the sound off.
There might be public comment tonight, I'm guessing.
There might be. We have a session, but start the.
So this is the orientation.
Yeah. That's the work that we'll be doing with Samantha. Change
There he is.
the agenda. We have 5. B and C are now D and E.
Where's our pictures taken? They got here early.
E is going to be
What's the deal?
official newspaper.
So Stacy sent out an email that since Fabulous is gone, we're gonna postpone it.
We could like Photoshop them in
Yeah.
for some picture we had from Chili Lions or something.
The official deposit.
I got a photo of him in a
So
Hawaiian shirt. We could.
No, we did.
Yeah.
Photoshop them in.
So they'd be.
Put a girl body to him too. Just have his head. Get people talking in town.
you have no problem continuing.
She sent an email. What time did she send an email?
It was probably 4:30,
Oh.
4. So.
Yeah.
Not you too.
Well, I don't know how.
We can change it, but it's okay. One sick person at a time. We've got an aging council, and we're all pretty confident.
And I know that I was like one of the actually backups to the transit committee.
Oh, okay. Good. Yeah. Good point. We'll throw you.
Yes, he
throw you in
is.
as an alternate.
I forgot. We have a meeting next week too.
Do you know the time?
2:00 usually.
2 o'clock.
It's gonna be here.
It's here, okay.
I may have
I can make
to. You might have to go.
Yep.
So I think I'm gonna be out of town next
Okay, I can
Tuesday.
make it.
Okay. That was easy.
Every 2 months in the St. Peter and back. Okay.
Yeah, if you can make it, that'd be
Oh, yeah,
great.
yep.
Yeah, I'm gonna be out of town.
You guys don't ride the bus to St. Peter?
They don't allow us to. We're too. You have to be sober to be on. That's the problem.
Call this meeting of the city council for January 2nd to order. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone, and to everybody listening to us on live stream and Facebook. Start off by extending a hearty 2018 to everyone in Sueur from your entire city council. Happy New Year to you all. Go ahead and entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's carried. Public comment. Public comment provides an opportunity for the public to address the council on items that are not on the agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Persons wishing to make a comment must sign up in advance of the meeting on the sheet provided and identify themselves by providing a name and address. We didn't have anybody sign up on the sheet, but I'll extend the offer to anybody within the audience, anybody wish to address city council. Okay, seeing nobody, go ahead and entertain a motion to go ahead and close the public comment portion of the city council meeting.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's carried. We now move on to our regular agenda, and We do have a couple of changes in regards to our agenda. We have two changes to make it easy for everyone. Currently, those that have the paper, B and C will now be identified as D and E. 5B will now be our official newspaper portion, and 5C will be our official depositories for the city of Sueur portion. Is there a motion to go ahead and accept the change to our agenda?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's carried. First thing on the docket tonight is 5 Alpha, the board and commissions appointment.
Mayor Hague, members of the city council, annually we appoint various positions on various boards and commissions. The mayor has the sole right and duty to do this, but last year there was some discussion that happened at the beginning of the year regarding some of these board and commission appointments. In the packet, there is one addition compared to the one that's in the packet. The Ridgeview Sueur Hospital Board, that appointee would be Dave Johnson. Couple things, I'll just point out the things that have changed from 2017 or what the recommendation is from the mayor. Essentially, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, that appointee would now be Newell Krogman. The one thing that was pointed out with me from Councilmember Roloff is that the MRVT has an alternate, and he will be one of those alternates, so that will be in addition to this table. And I believe the 169 Mayor Bob Broder, or former Mayor Bob Broder, he's no longer on that one, so that'll just be Benjamin Roloff. I believe that those are the only changes that have been made. With that, I'll basically what I'm looking for is to approve this as the mayor has mayor and city administrator have come up with on this table with the additions that I have made. And I'll take any questions, or mayor can take any questions regarding these appointments.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. City Administrator, I believe I was also added as an alternate for the Board of Adjustments and Appeals.
That is correct. You have been.
That is correct. Yep.
And I'd like to put it on record that I'd like to personally thank past Mayor Bob Broder for his services to the city of Sueur, and welcome Councilmember Krogman for our Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and also taking over the responsibility as the alternate for our Board of Adjustments and Appeals. Anybody have any questions or concerns regarding the appointments? Councilmember Wilkie.
On the fire commission, I was wondering if I could get when the meeting is gonna be, because I somehow lose it or whatever.
Yeah, and that's typically an annual meeting,
No, it's
February, June, and October.
February, June, and October. Yes, I will definitely make sure that you're on that list.
I don't wanna miss one, but
Any other questions or concerns?
Thank you.
Yes, I noticed for the coalitions of actually, for the C, for the CGMC, I noticed on the packet, it says we need to appoint someone for that position, and I would be happy to, have that. It would be on actually page 4. It says to appoint a council representative, and then it says to also appoint a alternate.
Oh, you are 100%
Yep.
correct, Councilmember Roloff. So you'd like to go ahead
Yes.
and volunteer as the
Yeah.
alternate?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Give me just a second here so I can make the change. Any other questions or concerns? Hearing none, I entertain a motion to go ahead and accept our boards, commissions, and committees, appointees, and alternates for 2018.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's carried. We now move on to line item 5 Bravo, which is the official The designation of the official newspaper.
Mayor Hague, members of the city council, annually we designate who our official newspaper is. This is where we publish public notices, ordinances, things like that require public notice. The recommendation is to have the Sueur News Herald be the city's official newspaper.
I make a motion to make the newspaper, the Sueur News Herald, the official newspaper.
Is there a second?
I will
to that
second.
motion? Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Now move on to line item 5, Charlie, which is the designation of the official depositories for the city of Sueur.
Mayor Hague, members of the city council, designating the depositories allows us to deposit money into or funds into various institutions. We currently have 4 institutions that we use for certain financial services. Those are Hometown Bank, Cornerstone Bank, First Farmers and Merchants Bank, and then the Minnesota Municipal Market Fund, which is called the 4M Fund for short. So 3 of those are local. The Minnesota Municipal Market Fund is managed out of Minneapolis. So with that, what we're looking for is just designation of those 4 institutions as our official depositories.
Entertain a motion to go ahead and accept the designates as the official depositories for the city of Sueur.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion is carried. We now move on to line item 5, Delta, which is the administrator review process discussion.
Mayor Hague, members of the city council, the Personnel and Budget Committee met this afternoon and went over the city administrator 6-month or evaluation criteria, the process, and the actual criteria for the evaluation. I'll go over just a kind of a timeline summary of what this is, and then I'll turn it over to a representative from the Personnel and Budget Committee to go over some of these things. But essentially what we're going to do, or what's requested, is that this evaluation has been dispersed to city council members on January 2nd. What we're looking for is for this group to review the form of each job performance category and each subcategory and formulate possible subcategory clarification questions. So if there are any questions that any city council members may have about what the city administrator job description entails, if you would like details on that, please come to the January 8th meeting with those questions ready, and I should be able to answer those at that time. That'll help you kind of understand a little bit more about the evaluation process. That being said, by Tuesday, January 16th, the Personnel and Budget Committee has requested that the evaluations be filled out by each individual council member and submitted to City Hall, where they'll be kept. On January 17th at 1:30 p.m., the Personnel and Budget Committee will hold a closed meeting to analyze and summarize the evaluation results, the result forms. Then the actual evaluation will be held on January 22nd in a closed session. After that meeting, the Personnel and Budget Committee will work with the city attorney to formulate a summary of the evaluation, and that summary will be read on February 12th at the city council meeting. So with that, some of the details, I'll turn that over to, I believe, Dave Johnson to go over some of the changes or some of the general ideas regarding this evaluation.
Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to highlight a couple concepts here for you as you prepare to take a look at this. On page 1, if you just go back to page 1 again on the process, as Jasper mentioned, we have 8 categories of job expectations that we're looking to evaluate. 8 major categories with subcategories. And this is taken directly from the city administration job description. This is perfectly aligned with the job description. So that's one key concept. The other thing on page 1 you'll see is that we have listed the 2017-18 priorities or goals that the city council is working on, and our city administrator is responsible for leading us in. So these, you'll see in a couple instances, and I'll show you that in a minute, reference to these priorities under a category. And so each of these A, B, C through G are some major things that the council decided they wanted to emphasize back last January as our priorities for this year going into last year going into this year, 17 going into 18. Jasper's gone through the timeline here. We're just going through the process tonight. We can respond to questions on the process, but the actual evaluation discussion is going to be not happen until January 22nd. If you go to page 2, which is the first page of the actual sheets that you'll be evaluating, the categories, you'll notice that they're numbered from 1 through 8, first one being overall leadership and management of the city. In this, you need to go through each of those subcategories and make sure that you understand what that means. If you have any questions on what that means, then next Monday at our January 8th meeting, please bring those up for clarifications, and Jasper will comment on those. The one I use as an example in the process is under, if you go to the top of page 3, category 4, recruitment, training, and supervision of personnel. On subcategory G, it says promotes training and development opportunities for employees at all levels of the organization. How do we as council members know how he does that unless he kind of describes and clarifies that for us? That would be an example. There are other places in here where we've got subcategories that we may not completely understand what they mean, and next week Jasper will respond to our questions on those. That'll give us a better opportunity to know specifically what we're evaluating. There's room, okay, so if you start with number 1, go back to page 2. When you're looking at this after next week, you're supposed to, each of us is supposed to check either meets expectations or needs improvement next to each one of those the major category and the subcategories. Then underneath each one of the major categories is room for comments, specific comments that you can make about any of the, anything in the category or the subcategories. And that's true of each one of the 8 divisions there. So it's important that you take a look at each subcategory as well as the overall one and decide whether Jasper is meeting expectations or needs improvement. If you feel he's doing a really good job in some particular thing, that's something you could put under comments. We had our city attorney, Todd Coriel, advise us on this, and it's important to be as objective as we can on when we do the ratings, and that's, so leaving it meets expectations and needs improvement is a lot more clear than having a rating system from 1 to 5 where we're trying to distinguish between what a 1 is and what a 3 is and what a 5 is. That's the reason for that. In our deliberate, going back to page 1 on the process here, on January 8th, then Jasper will entertain questions about the subcategories. Our Personnel Budget Committee will get back together on Tuesday the 16th, or excuse me, by Tuesday the 16th, we all need to turn our forms in to the City Hall here. Mayor Haig will collect those, and our Personnel Budget Committee will have a meeting the next day and compile all this. In that meeting, it'll be a closed meeting. Our Personnel Budget Committees are usually open, but to compile your confidential comments and so forth, the meeting will be closed during that portion, and we'll pull that together and bring that back for discussion at the January 22nd City Council meeting. And when we have that discussion, that meeting will also be closed during the time we have that discussion. In our January 24th meeting, will come up, the Personnel Budget Committee will come up with a summary, and then that summary of the evaluation will be reported at the February 12th City Council meeting so that we have the public can hear what the overall summary evaluation for Jasper is. So at this point, I think we're open to questions on the process and what your expectations are for what each of us is to do, that would be appropriate at this time.
And I think before we go into the questions, I'd like to personally thank Council Members Krogman and Johnson for their hard work that they put into streamlining the evaluation process to where it's going to be something that each of us as city council members can have a thorough understanding in regards to what the expectations are of a city administrator, as well as how well the city administrator feels as though he's being evaluated by us. So just a word of note on this, when we're putting together our marks and things of this nature, please be generous with comments. You know, if you have something, whether it's, you know, if it's something you think needs improvement, or you think there's been something that's been done that you think is absolutely wonderful, please make sure you put notes on that. And we will go ahead and take all that information. We'll put all this together, and I think it's going to be something that's going to show the community that we're extremely transparent with the process, and I think it's something that needs to be done. And again, thank you very much, Councilmember Krogman and Johnson, for all your hard work.
Can I just piggyback on
Sure,
that?
please.
I'd just like to emphasize how important it is for us to take this seriously. It's really important that employees at all levels receive feedback on how they're doing. That's one of the most important things, one of the most important functions in an organization like the city, that we give feedback, positive and corrective, to all employees, including our city administrator. The city administrator is the only city employee that the council is in the position to evaluate. So I hope that we can all take this very seriously and look at this as a way to help not only Jasper as a city administrator, but our team, our partnership that we have with him.
Mr. Mayor, if I may,
Please, Councilmember Krogman.
there's a couple issues here we have to look at. First of all, a note on the first page. Notice the period. It is from the day he began as our administrator through the 29th. That's a 6-month period. That's per his contract. We'll have another 6-month period that will end in June of this year, and then we will go to an annual, just so everybody understands what we're doing.
Good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Secondly, the expectations, the first thing on the first page reads, these are the expectations per the city administrator job description. They're not some general expectations. They are tied to the criteria you see here. Third thing is we have a small problem in that changes were made but consistently not made. If you look at page 2, the first column of the boxes to check would be meets expectations, the second's needs improvements. The other ones are all reversed. So we need to correct that. And I don't know how to do it, except to say what was not yet said is we are going to send an electronic copy to each council member. And if we can make that the one they use, then we're okay. If we use this one, you could really get mixed up checking these boxes. Or if I may, Mr. Mayor, if you could just determine if each member is able and willing to receive this electronically and then fill it out. And maybe Jasper could explain, our city administrator could explain why we'd send it electronically in terms of the autofill or whatever you call it.
Is there anybody that cannot fill this out electronically? Can you do it okay?
We'd still turn it in as a hard copy.
Yep.
But there's a feature, it's much easier to fill out the boxes when you use it electronically.
I think that, does everybody have a good idea in regards to what the expectation is? Okay, so we'll have to make this change. I think everybody sees the change that Councilmember Krogman's talking about, from going from the first overall category to the next 7. We just have to change the meet expectations and needs improvement, so that
Finally,
nobody gets confused.
Finally, for discussion purposes and for ease of us as we analyze this, Section 8 the letters have to be added to each of the subcategories. So that'll be another change.
Got it. Okay. Questions, concerns, thoughts? Everybody understand what the expectation is? I'm guessing that we'll be able to have these changes made and we can get this forwarded out to everyone tomorrow. City Administrator?
Yeah, definitely.
So, again, disregard what we currently have here. Wait for your electronic one that you'll receive tomorrow. and that'll be one you can start filling out. Be generous with comments, and do our city administrator the best possible justice in regards to how well he's done his job from the period of June 29th to December 29th, 2017. Again, any questions, concerns, thoughts? Hearing none, entertain a motion to go ahead and accept this then as our prescribed format for the city administrator evaluation, and to go ahead and render assistance from each of us individually to go ahead and take care of getting it filled out and submitted on a timely basis by the 16th of January.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion is carried. We now move on to line item 5 Echo, which is incentive training.
Mayor Hague, members of the city council, this is kind of the first part of a multi-part program where we kind of try to educate not only city council, but all of the boards and commissions and various committees that are out there regarding some of the tools that the city has to use with developers, housing, industrial, commercial. Community Development Director Samantha DiMaggio will go through this. She has a great PowerPoint and ask questions, because this is some complex stuff, and we want to make sure that when Sam and I do come to city council with potentially some sort of subsidy plan, that it's understood, and that you guys can ask the right questions at that time as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sam.
And if I may just add, we have our president of our EDA, and we also have members of our planning and zoning here, so this is for the benefit of all of us, so please feel free to go ahead and ask questions along the way if you have anything to say. Okay?
Mayor Hague and members of the city council. Members of the city council, as I said, I appreciate the CPAT, Planning Commission, and EDA being here as well. And I'm not sure, maybe we can keep this a little bit informal. Has anyone in the room ever had any kind of business subsidy or incentive training? No, so this is the first time, okay. And so I'm curious if anyone has any notions ahead of time. Often when we talk about incentives, people, there's some names that maybe come up as corporate welfare and different things like that. And I'm curious if anyone in the room has any notions of a business subsidy in advance. So if I were to come to you today and say, I would like to give a company a business subsidy, how many people would consider that, just based on me coming to you? And how many people would say, you know what, I don't want to do a business subsidy ever. I don't think that's something that we should do. All right. No, and I'm glad you're honest about it, because I think that there are some questions that the public has about how incentives work and what they're used for. So that's why we're having this training tonight. So one of the things that you're going to find, whether you're going to like this or not, is the first one is confidentiality. And so you may say, Sam, you've been working on something for months and you haven't said anything to any of us. And that can sometimes be offensive to some council members, the EDA, members of boards and commissions. You might say, why would you not tell us what you're working on? And there's a few different reasons behind that. But one of them is that we consider the people that we're working with our partners, whether it be us as government, whether it's a business we're working with or a developer. And I often like to remind everyone, whose story is it that we're telling? As a city, we're extremely excited. But as a business or a developer who might be investing millions of dollars, that's something that you have to wait and figure out whose story it is. And so often I tell everyone, it's not just me who wants to tell that story. It's often them, the business owner or the developer, they want to share their news as well. So I've seen some cities who like to spill the beans first, and often developers will get very upset about that. Some might even walk away, because some of these can be competitive decisions that they're making. They don't want everyone to know what's happening with their business plan. So don't ever take it personally if you're saying, Sam, you knew about something for months, and I've only had a week to know about this. That's kind of how the game goes. When we talk about business data, though, the state of Minnesota actually has statutes that regulate how business data is kept. And they have laws about what's considered public and what's not considered public. And so one thing to remember is I might get some information in from a developer, but until I get an actual application from them requesting a subsidy, really there is nothing to report. Once they have an application, then certain portions of that application are considered public data. So there are some things that are never considered public data. And so I may come to you in the future and say, I might have a project. We may have a consultant look at some of that data and analyze that data as a way to have them maybe give us the numbers, but have a third party look at it, because some of that data, when you want to keep it secret, so some of it might be, especially if you have a privately owned company whose financials are not public, by someone being able to look at their financial data, that would give you a competitive advantage. And so parts of that can be kept secret. And so that's often another reason why you won't hear from me until I actually have a true application, because things can happen, things can come and go, and they might be considering more than one city at a time. And so as they're looking at different places, you don't want to be the one to definitely yell that they're coming to my town. And I've heard stories of that through the years of people saying, you know, they were coming to look at a site. They didn't want anyone to know they were there. There was a marching band and a big flag welcoming you to town. And, you know, we might think that's great, but for them, that isn't something that they wanted the world to know at that time. So we really have to watch how we handle things. And I wanted you to know that there is statutes out there that regulate what we can share and when we can share it. And so I wanted to make sure you were aware of those. And some of the beginning information that we're going to go over, you know, I kind of chuckle about a business subsidy because some people say, you know, it's so easy, you just get a check. And so I kind of wanted to start from the back end about the government aspect of it. And as you look at these laws and you think about it, I want you to think, if I was a business, would I go through that? You know, there has to be a reason that they're asking for the incentive. And so we're kind of going to look at it from the back end first. So Minnesota Statute 116J.993 through 116J.995 is where they define what a business subsidy is. And in the state of Minnesota, they look at anything that's over $150,000 a business subsidy. So in order to give out a business subsidy, you have to hold a public hearing. There's things that you have to do to go along with it. And so they do, though, as we like to do, there are 23 different exceptions on what is not included in the business subsidy law. And so I did not make all of you copies because I have my own cheat sheet of books that I've kept for the past 17 years going over these laws. And so I don't want you to worry about having to know the laws, know that I know them, but I want you to consider some of these on what could be a business subsidy and what might not be. So then they talk about if it's a business subsidy, if it's less than $150,000. So we've started some new programs here in town that are less than $150,000. And so then you have to look at it, is that a business subsidy or not? And so if it is a business subsidy, it has to follow different policies that we have in place. But some of them I wanted to point out to you are assistance for housing. That's a huge subsidy that the city of Sueur has given in the past, has been tax increment financing for housing. Some of our assisted living here in town have gotten TIFs. And so in the state's eyes, they don't look at that as a business subsidy because you're using it for housing, maybe for senior housing, for elderly, things like that. But some of it also goes into, you know, so if it's assistance for housing, if you're selling, let's say we own a piece of land and we're going to sell it for $1, but we're going to sell it to a government entity, that isn't considered a business subsidy because we're selling it for another government entity to use. So there's lots of little caveats that go along with it, and it can be very confusing. So I just want you to know that when you think of a business subsidy, think of $150,000 or more. So prior to giving out a business subsidy of $150,000 or more, we have to adopt criteria. So I think everybody in the room has one, and at home, if you want a copy, I can put it online later on. We've actually adopted a business subsidy policy. Ours was adopted on October 11th, 1999. So the state of Minnesota, before anyone's allowed to give out a subsidy, you have to adopt a policy. So you can take a look at ours. Ours is pretty short and sweet, just like I am, but I will tell you that in the future, ours will be longer. Because unfortunately, I think that there's some important parts of the law that we're missing. And one of them is that you need to have in here a wage. So that's something that we're going to go back through in the future and saying, if we were to give out a business subsidy, if you were going to come here, you would need to create jobs that pay a certain amount. You have to have a floor. And unfortunately, our policy is missing that. Ours says we're going to consider other things. That's actually not something that you're allowed to do. So we're going to have to set that. You can see the bullet point. It says we have to set a minimum wage floor as prescribed in business subsidy law. So unfortunately, ours is missing that. But we're going to update this. And I think it's important, though, that as a city that we have these policies in place, so if we're looking for certain businesses or if we're looking to develop certain parcels, we have a plan. And I think that's something that our policy should go in with our plan. So I'm excited to put all of that together. And something else that's important is if you were to get a business subsidy, so over $150,000 from us, we would have you sign an agreement with us. And so that agreement would say, if you don't do as you've promised, you have to repay us. So when someone does get a business subsidy, you may say you have to create 500 jobs, all paying $13 an hour. You have to spend more than $20 million on your building. You can pick what you want it to say in that agreement, and they have up to 5 years to do as they're told. If for some reason they don't do it, then we would ask for those funds back. And so it's important to know that once you don't just get the check and you get to walk away, they make sure that you maintain what you say you're going to do for a minimum of 5 years. It's interesting because with the subsidies that you give out, there's also a ton of reporting. So the state of Minnesota tracks this. They have what's called a Minnesota Business Assistance Form. So you have to fill it out for a TIF or a tax abatement, except for if you did it for housing or for one of those exceptions that we talk about, then the state doesn't record those. But if you're giving it out to a business, if you're doing a TIF, a tax abatement, if you're giving out a grant between $25,000 and $150,000, we want to track that. They also want to track any loans between $75,000 and $150,000. So they definitely want to know who these subsidies are going for, what they're being used for. And the state of Minnesota, the auditor's office also gets annual TIF reports from us. So I think it's important to know that if you're going to give out these subsidies, they're watching to make sure that you're doing what you say you're going to do with the money. It's very important to our taxpayers. We're using their money, and we want to make sure that we're following the law. Is anyone confused yet?
The 2,500 that's referred to in the third bullet point and the 25,000 in the fourth bullet point, what's again the difference between the two?
So the 2,500 is you have to have a population. So if you have less than 2,500 people, so they have different requirements based on your city size as well. I would assume that a lot of cities with less than 2,500 aren't doing a ton of business subsidies.
Sam, if I may ask a question.
Of course.
It was on your slide, but don't go back.
Okay.
I noticed this policy was formulated by the EDA.
Yes, sir.
Is that still the case, that the EDA sets that policy?
So I'm glad that you asked that question because in the resolution that put together the EDA that was adopted on July 1988, we gave the EDA authority to do business incentives for us, to do subsidies for us. And so in the future, though, going forward, I would ask you and the EDA to work together on a joint policy. I think it's important that you both agree to the terms of it and that it makes sense for all parties involved, because there could come a point in time where I could ask the EDA if they would do a loan from the state of Minnesota for one project and ask the city council to do one for another. I want to make sure that you're communicating and that you all follow the same policy. We've recently found that with one of our projects here in town that they went to 2 different groups. The groups weren't communicating, and I think it's important that we have a policy that stands for both groups. So you can't really play that game. You have to, no matter who the group is, you have to follow our same policy. But that's an excellent question.
Follow-up to that question. Because this particular adoption was done back on October 11th of 1999, and you already mentioned the fact that wages just happened to be one of the articles that was not included within the current policy. Is EDA going to go through that and make the necessary changes to update the policy and then have that available for city council to go ahead and take a look at, or who's driving this particular process?
So I think if it's okay for everyone involved, I think what we'll do is we'll hold a joint public hearing. So once we have the policy, we'll send it to both groups to review. If anyone has any comments or wants to look at it, we'll make sure our attorney has looked at it. We'll look at some other cities to see what they've included in theirs. But I want to make sure that we do this. And then you have to hold a public hearing. So the public has to be able to come and have a chance to weigh in on what your policy says. So I want to make sure that if we're doing it, that the public knows that they can come, that they can weigh in on the job and wage numbers that we put in there. And we'll definitely look around to see what other cities have. When I started in the city of Shakopee, for example, their wage, I think, was $12.50 an hour. When I left, they'd increased it to $17.50 an hour. So I think it depends on where your economy is at and what type of jobs you're looking for and how you're trying to grow. But I think that's something that this should kind of be a living document as well, that you look at and not just put on the shelf and say, you know what, in recent years, yeah, we were trying to attract a certain type of job. Now maybe our demographics have changed and we're looking for a different type of job. So it's not a bad thing to change those wages. Or every single one of these that I've ever read has had that caveat that council can always change their mind at any time. And so I think that's also something that you could add in there. But I think it's important to at least have some type of wage floor in there saying, we're not willing to even consider giving you a subsidy unless you pay a certain livable wage amount. So we talked about this a few times, but who's DEED? And I think that some of the acronyms keep coming up, but DEED plays a major role in economic development in the state of Minnesota. They are the Department of Employment and Economic Development. So DEED is the state's principal economic development agency. They promote business recruitment, expansion, retention, international trade, workforce development, and community development. They also have tools and incentives that help us remain competitive with other states. I think when you look at economic development, it's definitely city to city, but it really is a lot of state to state. I have still to this day, I love to go to different events and talk to people from other states because we compete often with Iowa, with Michigan, with North Dakota, South Dakota, and it's interesting to see how they compete with each other. And so DEED really takes a look at our programs and makes sure that we're being competitive. And so they offer their own programs. And so when we had just done the downtown master plan, and I think even the comprehensive planning, it talked about using some of DEED's programs. And so I wanted to just mention a few of them that they have. They have the Minnesota Investment Fund. You can get up to $1 million to help expand your company, to add workers, to buy capital equipment. You have to, though, again, promise to commit so many jobs within a certain amount of time. The state of Minnesota is very job conscious with all of their programs. You'll see that's kind of a theme that continues through. The next one is the Minnesota Job Creation Fund. Again, you can get up to $1 million for creating or retaining high-paying jobs for constructing or innovating facilities. They have a new one, which is an emerging entrepreneur loan program. This is interesting because the state of Minnesota gives these funds to small groups to manage for them. So I would assume here it would potentially be Region 9 who might manage ours, the Initiative Foundation. They give those funds to them and then ask them to help spread the word or to branch those out. But it's important, especially as we're starting our REV program, that we figure out who has those funds, how they work, what we can do with them. They also have the Greater Minnesota Public Infrastructure Program, and this provides public infrastructure grants for expanding or retaining jobs, increasing the tax base, or creating economic development opportunities. This is one that's special for Greater Minnesota, and I appreciate that they have funding. We would be eligible for that funding, but I think the key phrase here is public infrastructure. So when I say public infrastructure, we're talking publicly owned stormwater ponds, publicly owned roads. If you were asking to pay for a parking lot for a private business, that is not eligible. It has to be publicly owned infrastructure that we're going to maintain and we're going to keep ourselves. The same goes for the Innovative Business Development Program. The program can pay, I think it's up to 50% of the capital costs for public infrastructure. So again, they want to make sure that it's publicly owned infrastructure. They don't want to pay for, they want to help the business grow, but maybe that's by putting in a public road that gets to that business or adding water and sewer that other businesses can use as well. So they want to make sure that you're keeping it open to the other public. And so they have numerous other programs that they offer throughout the year, and these change. The Job Creation Fund was just started maybe 3 years ago. It replaced the Job Z program back in the day. So they're always looking for new programs. They're always trying to be competitive. So the EDA pays my membership to a group called Positively Minnesota. They do marketing for the state. They train us on all their programs. They keep us up to date. And so I appreciate that they do that because they're a great partner to have. Before I left Shakopee, I think I'd gotten about $6 million from them in 4 years. So they definitely want to do deals. They want to help companies grow and expand and stay in Minnesota.
Sam?
Yep.
Is any of this political?
Everything is political, sir.
So in order to increase our chances of down the road getting some kind of financial assistance from DEED, we would need to grease the wheels politically?
No, you know what I think is good for you is I worked at DEED for 12 years before I started in this life. So I worked as a loan officer and ran those programs. So I think that's a good benefit for you. I have friends there still. But I think the important thing is the state of Minnesota has $22 million they want to get out the door. That's what they've given this for, is they want to spend it in these programs. They're looking for deals. They want you to bring them to the state. And so there are some cities that are saying, we want to do deals. And so those companies are looking at those cities. A lot of them right now are metro cities. And I'm going to show you an example here coming up of some of the taxes that you pay to be a metro city. And I think that we might have to use this towards our marketing advantage here shortly. So, but I think that's, I mean, definitely it's not going to hurt to to tell someone about our project, or, and I have a feeling that if you're a business here, that you're already politically affiliated anyway. I've noticed a lot of them seem to have friends in high places, and so, but I think just making sure that we keep in contact with them and that they know who we are and that I go to those events is important. Because then when I call them, they're like, I know Sam, I've done this deal with her, I've worked with her in the past, or, you know, it's important to let them know that we want to do business recruitment here. If that's what we want to do, we have to put the word out. Cities don't want to go where, you know, or businesses don't want to go where a city doesn't want them, right? They want to know that they're welcome there and that they're going to be treated well. And that's just like any of us. If you want to live in a town, it's the same thing. So I want to talk about the local incentives that we have more control over, such as tax abatement and TIF. Before I go on, does anyone have any more questions about the first part? Okay, so now is where things get extremely exciting. I know you've been waiting for this part. Tax abatement. Does anyone know what tax abatement is? Anyone want to take a guess? All right.
Officially, it's a way to go ahead and not charge a particular entity, like their property taxes or some other sort of incentive.
Kind of.
Okay.
So you as a city have the power to do a tax abatement. So you can, abatements could either be a permanent forgiveness or a temporary deferral of someone's property taxes. But the key is they have to pay those property taxes. And then you would refund some of the funds back if that's what you've decided to do. And so I think abatement is an interesting tool because a lot of people use it for economic development purposes, but some other communities have used it to secure bonds. So let's say you need to do a road project and you need to back those with something. You could potentially back them with your abatement dollars, saying, we know that the taxes from this portion of town are going to be used to pay the abatement if for some reason we have tax issues. You know, there's lots of flexibility with abatement. And so I think it's one to remember that as a local government, that's your choice as a city to be able to give back the taxes for some reason. So some of the permitted uses are economic development. And so the key there would be if it's an increase in tax base or the number of jobs, construction of public facilities or infrastructure. If we need to build streets and roads, we could dedicate the funding from a certain portion of town to help pay for new street and road construction. And that's something that I know people have asked me about in a downtown area. If you needed to add a new road, you could take the taxes from the businesses that are in that district. We could get a bond to build the road and say, we're going to pay those taxes with this district that we've created. So there's also redevelopment of blighted areas, providing access or services to residents such as housing or retail. There aren't too many incentives that you can actually do for retail, so abatement is one to remember that you could potentially take the taxes and give them back. You could do a deferment of it. You could even do a 50% property tax abatement. You could say, if you build this new store, or if you come in here, you create this many jobs, we're willing to give you back 50% of your taxes. We're willing to give you back 10% of your taxes. That's something that we would definitely negotiate with a business ahead of time. And so I hope that I negotiate well on your behalf, but that will often happen before it gets to you, but I hope that it's something that is, if it's something that we're negotiating with a business, or if it's something that you want to do and you could come to me and say, Sam, could we potentially back this or do this with a tax abatement? I definitely think that this is a little bit more leeway with these taxes, if that makes sense. But the key is you still have to hold a public hearing. So we have to make known to the public what our intentions are to do with these taxes. Yep.
Could you give examples of businesses in town that have used this tool?
Oddly enough, in the city of Sueur, I don't know that you've done a tax abatement. Most of what I have found is TIF, and I think the reason why is because you need to gather enough of an increment. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So when you're looking at a tax portion and you're looking at who gets the majority of the taxes, majority stakeholders in taxes, there's three of them. There's the city, there's the school district, and there's the county. And so when you do a tax abatement, you can only utilize the city's portion of it. So you can't give away anybody else's taxes in that case. Does that make sense? On a tax abatement, you would have to ask each jurisdiction. So you could go to Sueur County and say, we have a project that we want to do. Would you be willing to help us by holding your own public hearing and giving us your portion of the tax abatement? They may be willing to do that for us. But some counties we'll throw Dakota County under the bus, because I don't know if anyone here is with Dakota County, but Dakota County refuses to do that. So if you're a city in Dakota County, you have to do a TIF, because they will not partner on any tax abatements. And I think it's because it's a little bit more paperwork, right? And to do that, and so you'd have to go to them, they'd have to hold their own public hearing, you have to track it. It can be a little bit messy, so I think that's why people do it. And with this, you can pick how many years you want to do it for. So if you want to do, I don't know if it maxes out at 25 years, I think it's 20 years. So there are some exceptions. You cannot give away, so let's say this, you have a special taxing district. Let's say we added a special levy for the EDA or something like that. You can't give away that portion of the taxes. If it's been levied for, you don't have the power. You can only give the city portion. You can't give away any special levies, things like that. And the state general property tax, again, you cannot give away the state's taxes. You can't give away the county's taxes. You know, there's certain people you can't give away their taxes. You can only give away your city portion. And so each taxing district must independently approve giving away the funds. And annually, we cannot give over 10% of the net tax capacity or $200,000. So maximum tax abatement annually would be 200,000, whatever is the larger. So the terms, the political subdivision sets the length of the abatement, which, it says 15 years. But what happens is, if you only get 2 out of the 3, you can go to 20 years. So let's say we talk the county into doing it with us, then we could potentially go a little bit longer. Any questions on tax abatement? I have an example for you.
How does a school district get into all this?
Yep. So like I said, typically the 3 major taxing districts each get a third. So the school district gets their portion, the county gets their portion, and we get our portion. They're typically about a third, a third, a third. And so I would say you generally get about the same amount of money that the school district does, except for when there's a levy, then they get extra. Does that make sense? So you could go to the school district. I think one of the things that I like about tax abatement is the fact that if we want to grow our community and we want to make sure our schools stay great, we can go to Sueur County and not involve the school district, which I like. I like to be able to say, we want to continue growing our school district here in town. Sueur County, will you partner with us? That should increase our amount, but yet not affect the school district. So
Speaking from a school district perspective, something economic development that would bring more people to town and increase the level of students is a benefit to schools because they get funded on enrollment. So I could see
Per
a
pupil.
school district being receptive to this, even though they're putting off getting the taxes from it,
Yep.
they're getting the money through enrollment of students.
And I've heard that too, that a lot of them are more open to it than you would think. And so I think you would have to determine how much is needed to make the deal work. If there's a gap and trying to figure out, can we come up with enough money, you may want to look at something like that. So I have an example for you. And so with tax abatement, one that is common is called a pay-as-you-go tax abatement. And so basically how that works is, you're a developer, you have to pay the upfront costs. Every year when we get in our portion of the taxes, we rebate it back to that developer. So that's considered pay-as-you-go. So we're going to pay you when we get the money, we'll give it back to you. So basically you'll get your portion of the taxes back. And so this is a pay-as-you-go tax abatement that I did in Shakopee. So the first year of the disbursements happened in 2016, but I actually did the deal in 2013. And so prior to the deal being done, this was actually bare land in town. I think the value was $1 million. People in town were using it as a dog park. I think you've heard my dog park story. This is my dog park story. The total taxes on the land were $195,000 a year. The city's portion of the property taxes were $19,000. So when you look at that, that isn't a huge amount to abate, right? So by recruiting a manufacturer to come into this land, they agreed to create 258 new jobs, paying over $13.50 an hour. And so the taxable market value of the land went from $1 million up to $16,500,000, which then created a new tax amount of $680,000. So that then made an increment that we were able to give back to the business. So the new property taxes were $80,000. So it created about $60,000 in that year to give back to them. So we told them the max that we'll ever give back to you is $85,000 a year. So when you look at this as a city, you think, well, why would you give away $86,000 a year? What are you getting in return for that? So what the city of Shakopee got for that is they got 258 new jobs paying at a minimum of $13.50 an hour. So if you break down the cost per job by year, so if you take that $86,000 divided by 258 jobs, it would come out to be, through the entire thing, it would be, let me restart this. So if you take the maximum amount that Shakopee was gonna have to pay this company was $758,000. If you divide that by 258 jobs, over the length of the tax abatement, they would pay almost $3,000 per job. At Deed, everything we did, we figured out on the cost per job. That's how we kind of figured out our return on investment. So I'm still used to doing that today, as you can see. But annually, if you look at the $86,000 a year and you divide that by the jobs, it comes out to $335 per job. So you look at it as a community investment. Would you pay to have 258 new people? Would you pay $300 a person to have them be in our town and spend money every day and to shop at our stores and go to our gas stations and to build houses here and go to our school district? I mean, that's a pretty good investment, right? And so that's how I still look at it, is what are we getting for our money? And so it goes down to the cost per job. Because I can tell you, those people just getting gas and eating out are spending over that. I mean, $300 a year. Jasper, what is that a month? Jasper's good at math. Like $30 a month. I mean, that's a good deal, right? So you have to kind of step back and look at it and say, you know what? I love the fact that they came to town. They built this new building that has now a market value of our community that's going to be here to come. It's going to cost us definitely for the next 9 years, but after that is when those taxes, when it's paid for, is when you're going to reap the benefits of it. Jasper, will you go forward one more screen? So I made a chart of that for you. And so in the Metro, this is kind of what I was chuckling about. You can see their total tax bill of almost $700,000. So I showed you what they started off paying, what the city retained. So the city kind of retained the same thing. So how you look at a tax abatement and even a TIF, often you still take those taxes on the land. You never typically give away the taxes on the bare land. You just give away the increment what was generated by the new taxes. So that's why the city's taxes always remain about the same. You haven't really lost out on anything because you're still getting what you got before. And so in here I wanted to show you though, you can see the taxes for this business in the Metro were almost $700,000. And so you say, well, where did the rest of the money go? If you look at it. So in their fiscal disparities alone was almost $200,000. And so then they have to pay the school district, they have to pay the county. I mean, their taxes there are extremely high. Just paying fiscal disparity is something that we don't pay here, would save you $200,000 a year.
What's fiscal disparities?
Fiscal disparities is what's paid in by some of the bigger cities to some of the smaller cities. And so in Shakopee, they used to joke their money all went to Prior Lake. So some of the cities are maybe choosing not to bring as much industry in, but they're bringing in the housing. And so because they don't have room for the industry, they're saying, but hey, we've got all this housing for you. So they give them a portion of their taxes to help maybe where they don't have the industry. It was set up years ago. Some people think it's a completely unfair system. It's one that happens in the Metro, and I think it's something that we should definitely market, that we're just outside the Metro and you don't pay fiscal disparities here. I think that's a huge tax savings for them. Oh, good, it's working, okay. So next, do you have any questions about tax abatement and how that works? So next, we're gonna talk about TIF, tax increment financing. And I always tell everybody the easy Sam explanation of TIF compared to tax abatement. In tax abatement, before you take everybody's money, you have to ask them, right? In TIF, when you take everybody else's money, you don't have to ask them. So you, as a local government entity, could take the school district and the county's funds if they met an eligible purpose by you the only group holding the public hearing. So you can use their property taxes for two basic purposes: to induce or cause development or redevelopment, which would not occur had they not had those funds, or to finance public infrastructure such as streets, sewer, water, parking facilities that are related to a development. So they definitely have two distinct purposes for it. The key here is would not have happened but for getting these funds. So how does it work? When a new TIF district is created, and so that's what's important, is you have to set your boundary in advance. So when we hold our public hearing, we have to tell them exactly where our TIF boundary is going to lie, what's going to be included in it. And so we have to tell them how much the taxes are right now on that land and how much we think they're gonna generate after the new taxes are in play. So you have to set your net tax capacity for the districts. So then that will tell them how much the increment is gonna be on an annual basis. So the tax increment is limited to the tax derived from the certified tax rate. So basically, they're gonna say, we know what your original tax rate was. We know what the increment is and how much that difference is and what has been captured. And you can use that increment to pay for land acquisition, site prep, public infrastructure, things that are related to the TIF project. So with the TIF funds, there's a mismatch between when most TIF costs must be paid at the beginning of the development and when the increments are received. So this is what we talk about kind of with tax abatement, where it's more of a pay-as-you-go. You can then do bonds or interfund loans, things like that that help you pay for it. Most of the time, though, I think cities still do pay-as-you-go financing. They ask the developer to pay the costs up front, and then they pay them through time. But as a city, we do have the option, if we have a different fund that we could borrow from, or if we need to do bonds, we could then back those with our TIF district. So the people who are allowed to use TIF districts are housing and redevelopment authorities, HRA, EDAs, port authorities, and cities. So the city, the municipality, is the person who must approve the TIF plan. So you as a city would have to approve the final TIF plan. And as I said, you would then make the decision to be able to take taxes for the city of Sueur, for Sueur County, or Sibley County, whatever county it may be, and for the school district. And so what you would do in advance, though, is typically you would send them a letter allowing them to give you a comment. But based on their comments, it's up to you at the end of the day, and based on the public's input, if you want to be able to award the subsidy or not. As I said, we talked about the but-for test. They want to make sure that you're not just subsidizing a development that would have happened anyway. And so let's say if we wanted to redo our streets, they want to make sure that you have a purpose in the end for why you would take that money to redo the streets. Or if you're helping a business, they're saying we would not have done this deal had we not gotten this money. Or maybe some of it is we would have built a smaller project. We wouldn't have had the money to build the amount of units that you as a city want. And so I think there's a little bit of between you as a city council and the developers and staff to say, this is what we want in the end, and this is why we're using these funds. And I think that's a missed thing, if missed opportunity, if we just say, well, take our funds and do whatever you want with them. Because the whole purpose is to make sure that we as a city are getting what we want for these funds and our residents are getting what they need with these funds. And so I think it's important that those conversations go on and you discuss why you're offering an incentive and what you're getting for it.
Quick question.
Yeah.
If we can impose a TIF on school district or county, can
Yep.
they do the same to us?
They cannot. Only you can do it. But I did learn a valuable lesson about that. I was doing a little project called Amazon, and I needed some funds to pay for the road. And I found out that Scott County also needed some funds to pay for their portion of the road. And I found out that they have the power to take the money from the TIF to pay for their roads in advance. So there are some caveats to the law that I didn't know about, and I'm sure we'll learn every single time, but especially when it comes to public infrastructure, if they're saying you're also going to affect our infrastructure, that the county then can come back and say, we need the funds just as bad as you do. And so I think it's a dance that you dance with your partners every single time, whether it be other local government entities or the business or the developer, that we make sure that we're getting what's best for our community. And in that case, it was really having the roads done, which was best. And so the county took their portion, the city took their portion, the roads got updated, and it was good for their entire business park. That's one way to pay for roads. And I think, Jasper and I often joke about the cost of building roads. It's extremely expensive. A lot goes into it. And I think people just think, oh, we just do a road. And there's really a lot that goes into it. And the costs are huge. And so we want to make sure that if we're serving one business, that we can serve more than one if we can. And make sure that we get the best return on our investment.
Now, is the city responsible then to go ahead and take care of the cost or the lost tax opportunity back to the school district and also to the county?
No, sir.
Or is that waived?
So when you agree to do the TIF, you're agreeing to use your portion of the taxes, the school district's taxes, and the county's taxes to assist this business. And so through your public hearing and through your putting that TIF plan together, that's why they can comment to you and say, I don't really want this, or I don't agree with it. But at the end of the day, it's up to the city council to vote and to decide that. So that's where things, and it was going back to Councilmember Johnson's, things can get, pretty hot internally politically as well. And so I think it's important that as staff, if we bring you something, and I'm going to talk about it a little later on, but I think having policies that are more than one page are important, right? And making sure that we can clearly tell people what we're looking for and who we're willing to help out and what's going to be best for our community. And so that's definitely something that we're going to have to work on going forward. But here's some common uses of a TIF district. And it's interesting, with the TIF districts, they set maximum time periods. So if you're going to do a redevelopment TIF, the maximum is 25 years. And so with a redevelopment TIF, they have you do a slum and blight analysis. And so how that works is you have to hire a consultant who will come out and they'll tell you that the cost of rehabbing that building, it actually costs more than just building new. And so that's how you can move forward. You can't just say, I think it looks bad, I want to tear it down. I mean, the state definitely wants to make sure that you've done some analysis to figure out that this is the best use of money. Also with renewal and renovation, redevelop areas that are obsolete and not meeting the blight test, so that you can do a little bit less of 15 years, but you still have to have a consultant come out and do that analysis for you. Economic development, which is 8 years. They usually add on a year plus, so it's usually 9 years. So it would be 26, 16, 9. They add the first year in there. Housing, assist with low and moderate income housing, 25 years. Those are what we have most of, oddly enough, would be 25-year housing. And so, as I said, I think especially making sure that those were the kind of developments that we wanted were crucial at the time, because we've now promised other people's taxes and ours for 25 years. Contaminated soils is another purpose for doing it. And compact development, which I think is interesting. And I went through the state site and they show you how many of each one are done every year. And compact development isn't done often, but I think especially in a downtown area, that would be one that we should look more into, because we have a few infill sites in our downtown that we could potentially offer them a TIF if they were to build a new building. So there's definitely some that we're going to pay more attention to and look into. But as I said, I think they kind of give you the toolbox, and you can be as creative as you can be, but if you look back, there's a lot of rules that you have to follow to go along with it as well. So now I'm going to show you an example of a TIF. And so this TIF was done in 2012, and I look at it now, and this was done before I got to Shakopee, and if you were to ask me, in 2017, would I have done that TIF? I probably wouldn't have in 2017. But in the year 2012, the city of Shakopee was just coming out of their recession, and they were desperate to show people that they wanted to do deals. So they had some bare land in town. The total taxes on that land were $108,000. The city's portion of the property tax was $13,000. They had a business come in. They said, if you build this distribution center, we'll give you $2 million back to help pay for some of the construction costs that you're going to put into this building. They created 150 new jobs paying $12 an hour. So if you look at the cost per job, it's over the life of the TIF, it's about $13,000. Annually, it's about $1,400, which still isn't, that isn't anything to be upset about. But $12 an hour jobs are very hard to be head of household jobs. And so that's why I think looking at 2017, now knowing what we know about the price of rent and how hard it is to find rent and to find affordable housing, I think that is one that you're curious if you would do it again. And so that's why it's pretty easy for me to stand up here and say, I don't know if we got the best for some of our TIFs, but at the time, I'm sure that they took into consideration and did the best that they could as well. And so going forward in 2015, they had created the 150 new jobs. It's crazy to see the taxable market value of that building is $22 million. The taxes, the total taxes are $825,000 annually, which include the county, the school district, it includes the Met Council taxes, it includes fiscal disparities, everything is inside there. The total annual TIF that they collect, so between the school district, Scott County, and the city of Shakopee, is $276,000. And so with this, you're actually able to retain funds locally for administration of your TIF. So if we were to do a TIF, we could keep up to 10% of that to help pay my salary to administer the TIF. And so I'll show you what that looks like on a chart. So you can see what the total taxes were in 2012. They were less than $100,000. Now they're up over $800,000 a year. the taxes retained by the city are about the same because you still retain that land value. They've actually gone up a little bit because the price of land has gone up a little bit. You can see the total TIF generated. The amount that they gave back to the company was around $250,000, and the city retained, I think it was about $26,000 for the TIF. But it's interesting, if you look back on that field that they were getting $13,000 a year for, now they have 150 new jobs in town. They have people looking for those apartments. They have people wanting to shop in their stores. I think that's the reason that we give these incentives.
Okay, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir?
Early on, you asked how many of us would be for this and how many would be against it. And I'm wondering it almost seems like using these financial instruments is almost mandatory in order to compete for businesses. I mean, what would be the reason not to consider doing this?
Well, and I think it goes back to some people having that fear that you're giving away taxes and not getting something that you should get back. But I think you're right. If you want to play the game, or if you want to be competitive, if you want new businesses to come to your town, if you want your town to grow, you have to be competitive. And it's the same with the state of Minnesota. They can sit back and watch, Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa play the game. But I can tell you, if you're not in the game, you're not in the game.
Well, I think in fairness, that had everybody known what you've been talking about when you asked that question initially, you may not have gotten a.
Well, I'm gonna see. I'm gonna see if I change somebody's mind or not. We'll find out. But I think the thing is being smart about how you use your tools, right? And making sure that we as a city have everything in place so that when we want to invite company, again, as I said before, that we can say, hey, we know that we're looking for this kind of company. Are you paying this much in wages? This is exactly what we're looking for. That's something Jasper and I have talked about with the utility. A lot of cities that own their own utility often look for different data centers. Well, one of the good and the bad about a data center, and Newell and I have talked about this as well, is they don't have a ton of jobs, but their capital investment is huge. So that's where you have to weigh that good and the bad and decide, is it worth the tax amount that we're going to get from them for only a certain amount of jobs? And you have to look at the other not barriers, but the other incentives, I guess, to having our own public utility, being able to sell the power, things like that. So there's a lot that goes into it. And so you're stealing one of my slides, but I'll get there. You'll be excited, I think. But some of the other programs that we have, we just started a facade program. It's less than $25,000 a year. It is a grant. It's about $5,000 a year. That is not considered a business subsidy. So I'll track it, and we'll make sure we know where our money goes and what we're getting for it, but we do not have to report that to the state of Minnesota. We do have a revolving loan fund. So any loans that we gave out between $75,000 and $150,000, we should be reporting on. Fingers crossed. We'll find out eventually. Also, the EDA has the powers of an HRA, so they're able to develop alternative programs, and that's something that the EDA is talking about on a regular basis. What kind of programs does our city need? Should we be looking at developing them to meet the needs of our community, especially as we've started the REV program? What kind of programs do we want to create? But we have to make sure at the end of the day that when we create these programs that we are still following the law and make sure that we're reporting as we're supposed to. So one of my last slides here is why offer business subsidies? And I think this goes back to what you were talking about is, do you want to attract businesses? Do you want to keep the ones that we have and help them to expand here? Because I tell this story of when I was a kid. My mom lived in this super cute lake town when I loved to go there. And one of our neighboring towns started offering Job Z when Job Z first started. And so I must have been a teen, when it first started. And oddly enough, I worked that program. And slowly but surely, I saw all of our businesses leave that town and go to this neighboring town. And everybody in town was so mad at them, saying, I cannot believe that they're offering this incentive. And as you watched it grow, they got more retail and they got more houses and their school got better than ours. And it was painful to watch all this stuff go. And when I was at Deed, one of my friends worked that city and she said, Sam, and my dad called and he said, Sam, the last business has just left town. Literally, the last business had just left town and moved to that neighboring town. And my friend Emily was working that deal, and she was so upset about it. And she's like, Sam, I couldn't stop them, right? And I'm like, I don't know why that city, they had years to get in the game, and they chose not to. They watched that happen to their neighbor. And I saw people leave town, and my father-in-law has a restaurant or had a restaurant in that town, and the restaurants are dying. I mean, there's no one there eating out lunch during the day. I can see all these things that are happening from it. And so I think in my mind, that's maybe where some of my passion and drive come from, is because I've seen it happen. I've seen populations decrease, and Dave and I have talked about when you don't have jobs and you don't have, it affects the educational system. It affects our entire ecosystem of our community. And so it's really important that we continue to drive and to go for the businesses that we want, that we think are going to make our town better. And so things though that you should expect back is if we want a certain number of jobs, if we're trying to grow jobs, maybe we want to grow a certain type of job or a job of a certain wage. Those are things that we should look for as we're offering our incentives. Maybe we're looking for them to make a capital investment to build new buildings to help increase our tax base. Those are things that you can look for. Workforce housing is huge right now. A ton of cities are starting to offer that because as those houses come back, as will some of the retail and some of the other jobs and things that go along with it. And if you're a business looking for a community to go to, you want to go where they have a good retail base and where they have workers, right? So it all kind of goes together. And really at the end of the day, tax base is what we're after. That's what's going to sustain our community and build our roads and build our schools for years to come. And so I think it's important that we definitely make sure that we're following the state policies, but we have local policies. The fact that we only have this one-page business subsidy policy, I don't know that we're telling the world what we're looking for. And so you couldn't even find this online if you looked for it. I found it by asking the state of Minnesota for it, and they sent it to us. And so I think it's important that we make sure that we're in the game and that we have everything up to date as we want it to be. So my final thoughts, I want you to know, before I would ever bring you an incentive, Jasper and I will definitely work with this business and we will vet them and we'll make sure that they match the policies that we have in place. And so, as I said, I know it's going to be tough for you to say, Sam, how could you have been working with this company for 6 months and this is the first time I'm hearing about it? Please don't ever take offense to that and know that Jasper and I, that's why you've put us in these roles, is to make sure that we're getting the best for our community that we can get. And so we'll make sure that any analysis that needs to be done, that we look at the numbers, we make sure there's a gap. If there's no gap, we figure out if we're getting the type of development that we want in our community. We'll look at every aspect of it. What I ask from you, though, is that you keep an open mind and you really look at the big picture. Because as a community, as I said, not having these things really affects every aspect of what we do. And so when you don't have new companies coming to town or they're not creating jobs, we're not going to get new houses. We're not going to get new retail. Our schools are going to start hurting. You have to look at how that works, and you want to be competitive with your neighbors. And the fact that we are right in between Mankato and the Twin Cities, I feel like that's something that we're not using towards our advantage. And I think we need to start marketing these things that we have and go for it. But the one thing that I learned the hard way a little bit was art versus science. When I was a loan officer at the state, it was super easy to sit at my office, and not even in my cubicle. I was at my cubicle, and I could say I cannot figure out the scientific number of how you're giving the money that you're giving. I wanted to back everything into a number. I wanted to say you gave $13,000 per job for every single deal. And so one of my cities called me out one day and he said, Sam, you're trying to make it all about science. There's a lot of art that goes into this, and you have to look at what else are you getting? Are you getting that tax base? Maybe you're getting a company that you know is going to be an amazing corporate citizen, or maybe you're helping a company who's been in your town for 100 years grow. He's like, you cannot just look at the numbers. There's more to the game than just the numbers. And so I think that's an important lesson that I learned from him. And I hope you learned that from me as well, that there's going to be a time and a place, and I might ask you to do a deal, and you say, Sam, we did a different deal 6 months ago. But there's different factors that go into every single deal. But I just ask that you keep an open mind, and you definitely look at the big picture about why we're doing this. And I think that's one of the reasons that you've hired me and you've hired Jasper, is you want to help our community to grow. And so I'm hoping to be able to do that. But as I said, I want to make sure that we have our policies and we are ready to do this. And so as we kick off 2018, we definitely have a few things to fix sooner rather than later. But I'm excited to see the City Council and the EDA and the Planning Commission and the CPAT, all the different groups working together on this to make sure that we're getting the type of developments that we want. I know some land will definitely need to be rezoned or looked at in the future. And I think that it just goes to show that we all have to work together on these deals. So I hope I didn't bore you too badly. Everyone's still awake? Any questions for me?
So this needs to be approved?
So this was approved in 1999. They held a public hearing and they authorized a resolution that approved it. So what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll change it and I'll talk to Jasper, and maybe in the future we could have a joint public hearing. Maybe we could ask the EDA to stay a little bit longer and have the city council, and we could do one together at like 6:30 have it be the first agenda item, and we could talk about our new policy. And a lot of the policies, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of them say we're gonna follow the state's law, but you have to make sure that you include what the state asks for, such as that wage floor. And I think that's very important that we have that in there. And you know, I definitely wanna do a little bit more research as what are our current wages? And, you know, if we wanna grow new companies, what kind of companies is it that we wanna grow? And in the past, when I looked at this, I tried to look at it as not everybody's an engineer, right? And I wish that we had an entire community full of engineers that were making a lot of money. But that isn't necessarily our community at this point. So I think trying to find the businesses that best fit the needs of our community is important as well. And so when I was looking at some of the companies in the past that I worked with, I love the fact that they had alternative shifts. You know, some families want to have nights, weekends. Not everybody can be a 9-to-5 family. Some people are going back to school. And so I think those are things though that I'll need your feedback from too. And I'll need you to say, you know what, Sam, we need some alternative types of businesses, or we think that this, you know, if we just want to grow data centers, we can do that all day long too. You know, I think as a community, we have to decide what is it that we want to be and where do we want to go and set our goals to match them and then stick to them, right? Because there is going to be that caveat that you can change your mind at any time. But I think if you're going to try to recruit companies or you're going to send me out, or the EDA, we've talked about that, you know, having them pick certain companies that they want to look at if we want to get into agribusiness or whatever it might be. I just got a message today about Governor Ventura. Previous Governor Ventura is trying to get Minnesota super involved in cannabis and hemp, and he's having a forum coming up at the end of the month. And, you know, I think it's interesting as you look at that stuff. For certain parts of the state, they look at Colorado and the jobs and the money that it's brought in there. I mean, it's an interesting concept when you look at trying to figure out what is the next wave of business and where do we want to get involved in that wave. You know, for the good or the bad, you have to decide if you want to sit back and watch somebody else do it or if you want to be on the forefront. And it doesn't necessarily have to be cannabis, but I think you get the point. Is if there's something that we want to try to grow, let's figure out what that is.
No pun intended
No pun intended.
with cannabis. Okay.
What you want to grow. I love it. Yeah.
Are there any other policies that we need to be looking at that need to be collaborative?
Yep. And you know, in the past, Ruth just asked if there's any other policies that we should work together on. And in the past, I've made a TIF policy and I've made a tax abatement policy. And now that I've grown up a little bit, I look at them and I wonder, I don't know really why I did that. Because the state really mandates every aspect of what you can do with a TIF and a tax abatement. So I think just making sure though that we have a clear business subsidy policy, or, you know, even if it says in here that if we want to do some workforce housing of some sort or add some other caveats, I think we can do that. But I think making sure that we know why we're doing it is what's going to be the important thing of why we're offering this subsidy. So if our comp plan says that we need to look at growing the different types of housing that we have here in our community, and a way that we can do that is by using our business subsidies, then that's maybe what we should say, is that we want to help grow and diversify the housing stock in our community and intend to use our business subsidies to do that. I mean, it could be as simple as that, just having a few goals in here of what we want to grow. But, you know, and I could easily do a TIF and a tax abatement policy, but like I said, now I wonder, I don't really know why I did it. You know, I looked good. I shared it with a ton of other people. A ton of my friends have borrowed it and used it, and I still can't figure out now. You know, the state's really watching, Big Brother's watching everything we do with that. And so I think I basically said that in there, we're going to follow the state's policy, and, you know, it's kind of how it works.
So the tips I certainly get, is going back to the tax abatements. You mentioned that Dakota County was absolutely against that.
Yep.
How popular are tax abatements within the state of Minnesota? And maybe you have an example or two of some communities that are doing tax abatements and how that's benefited their communities? Because I guess I'm just not knowledgeable in that area, and I would like
Sure.
a little more education.
Well, and I think some of it is, and so unfortunately, a lot of what I know is from my previous employer with the city of Shakopee, but I will tell you, they just did a rehab to their community center, which is about $32 million. And so they bonded for that. They sold bonds for that community center. They backed their bonds with a tax abatement. So they backed them by saying, if we don't earn enough money from the revenue of the community center to pay off our note, that we will use the taxes from this district to be able to pay that back. And, you know, one of the things, and I think to Dave's point at the time, I never wanted to affect the school district because I had kids there and I had neighbors yelling at me about other things and I always felt nervous about that. But I think that's something that is a good frank talk with the school district of if we do this type of tax abatement, do you want to partner? I know in Shakopee, Rosemount, Emerson, they did a tax abatement and Rosemount, Emerson partnered. And I'm not quite sure why they didn't do a TIF. I think because they wanted to be a little bit more flexible with the use of the funds. And so with a TIF, it basically says you're going to pay for infrastructure, you're going to pay for site prep. I mean, it kind of tells you. With the tax abatement, you can be a little bit more flexible. And so I think for the good and the bad of it, I think that's what's nice about a tax abatement is that you can make that decision. But as I said, you might be the only partner in the game. So if we look at our taxes and what we get from just one entity, it might not be enough to get it done. And so I think that might be why a lot of smaller communities have to use a TIF. And there is a lot of paperwork that goes into it because the state of Minnesota wants to know you have to do reports for that. So in Scott County, I had to do the city of Shakopee's reports and Scott County's reports because it is a lot of paperwork and they didn't want to do it. And so I can see why they don't want to, even for your financial department, to have them start tracking that and to keep track of the 9 years or however many years you promised to give it back for. And but in Shakopee, one of the other deals that they had done is they had built some roads in advance of doing the taxes on it. And they said, as soon as we get those taxes from it, we're going to pay those bonds with the new businesses that we get. And then a recession hit and then they had to pay them from somewhere else. So I think, you can go either way.
But you
with
just
that.
normally see tax abatements done in like Duluth or St. Cloud, Rochester, Wallington, Twin City. You're not gonna normally see them in greater Minnesota.
I think the reason for that is, like I said, I think you're getting such a small increment. A lot of the bigger cities are going to get a larger increment from it. But I think it's interesting because Duluth has done a ton of redevelopment there. So they've used a lot of TIF. They've used, the state of Minnesota had some brownfield and cleanup grants that they've used for years, and now the state isn't funding those right now. So we just had a local legislator out here, and I talked to him about, I truly think that we could have some cleanup sites as well that I think they need to start funding again. So I think that might be something as we move forward, if there's some programs that we would like to see the state fund, that we might have to be a little bit more active into reaching out to them and talking to them about those programs. But I think at the end of the day, you still have to figure out what is it that you're trying to finance and figure out the best tool to help you finance it. And at the end of the day, you might find out, you know what? This isn't a good tool. This isn't a good deal. This isn't something that we should finance with the taxpayers' money. And that's okay too. But I think if you have a problem and you're trying to figure out that solution, there are creative ways for you to be able to do so.
With Minnesota having $22 million available to get rid of, this would certainly behoove a community like Sueur to go ahead and investigate all the potential avenues and see what we could potentially get going with.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about, in the state of Minnesota's money is all MIF, that $22 million is just Minnesota Investment Fund money. But when you get that money from the state, you have to sign that business subsidy agreement. So you have to promise Big Brother or Dad or whoever you want to say that you're going to do what you've intended to do. And you would be surprised at how many businesses don't want to do that. Because it's very hard for a business just starting out to say, I'm going to project 700 jobs, or I'm going to project 50 jobs, or I'm going to project 10 jobs. And so that's where the nervousness comes in, because after coming out of the recession, a lot of companies in the Job Z program were removed. There was a ton of clawbacks. It was very, very painful for a lot of the businesses in the state. And so I think a lot of them have that fear that they don't want to have to promise creating so many jobs at $13 an hour. And they've even said to me, well, Sam, I have a cleaning person who comes in and I don't pay them $13 an hour. So I said, well, if you want the state's money, you have to pay them the $13 an hour. And so that's something that a lot of businesses, that they don't want to have to deal with that. So a lot of them have chosen not to take those funds. And so I think it's interesting to then be able to say, well, then that's where we as a city could potentially do a TIF or a tax abatement or something else that maybe it's not that, you still have to do the business subsidy agreement, but we can then set the criteria and it maybe isn't quite as stringent as what the state might ask it to be.
For just a minute, could you go back to where you started with your concern or emphasis on confidentiality and dealing with developers and so forth? How do you deal with rumors that get started then? Inevitably, with social media and all this stuff, rumors get started. How do you quell those, or is that just a reality you deal with it and you just don't draw any attention to them?
Well, I think what's interesting is, as I said, until you have an application on file, there is really nothing to comment on, because with data privacy law, once you have an application, you have to comment on it. And so a lot of times, there is really no comment until you actually get an application from that person that's signed and dated, because things can change. But I thought it was interesting when I was recruiting Shutterfly, a few months after it was over, I had another city come up and apologize to me. And I said, I don't even know why you're apologizing to me. And she said, well, we have a local economic development group, and they decided to go after Shutterfly after you announced they were going to your town. And they reached out to them and tried to steal them from your town. And I'm so sorry that they did that. And I was completely shocked, thinking, why would you do that? And so I talked to the state of Minnesota. Deed was not happy with it, because that makes it look like we don't have a unity here in our state, that we don't have, things put together. And so I think that goes back to why I maybe a little bit more keep things until I'm ready to talk about them, because I would have never expected another city to call them and try to take them away from my city. I mean, obviously we had invested months, we had a public hearing, everything was ready to be signed and dated, and I was just shocked by it. And so I think, as good as maybe their intentions were, it still could have definitely changed things for my community that we had just put a ton of time and money in. So that's why a lot of that confidentiality comes into play. But as I said, that's what's nice about the state having these data privacy rules, is saying until you have an active application, you don't really have anything that you have to report on, because deals come and go. I mean, when I worked at the state, I would have communities call me that they were both working with the same business and they were going between two different cities. And so my advice to those cities was, if that's the only reason they're coming to your town is because you're going to offer them $1,000 more, then I would move on, right? Because they have to want to come to your town for more reasons than $1,000, because they're not going to stay in your town. They're not going to be vested to your town. And so I think you have to look for a business that's going to help your town be a better town, or your community be a better community. If they're just looking for $100 or $1,000, then is that really the type of business that you want? You want someone who's going to be a good corporate citizen as well and be active in your town. And those are questions that I'll even ask them is, can you tell me about another town that you're in, and what would they say about you? And I've even called some other cities and said, what do you think of them in your town? Do they ever invite anyone in for tours? Do they ever partner with the chamber? Do they do any community events? I think that's what we're going to want to look for, is businesses that are going to help make our community better, right? That's why we're going to be investing in them, and they're going to invest in us.
We also have the opportunity to look at our existing businesses.
Definitely.
And them as well. Should they be interested.
And I think that's what's great about it, is that I would love to help the businesses that we have here grow when they're ready. And so I think it's just creating those relationships with them and making sure that they can come to us and that it is confidential, right? So they can call me and say, Sam, maybe next year I want to look at this. Can you talk to me about some programs? Can we maybe talk to Deed? Can we find out what kind of money there is? Can we find out, how many jobs I'd have to create? Have those discussions ahead of time. And so then when they are ready to talk about it, or they are ready to make that decision, then we can make it be shared news and not just our news. I think it's important that it's also their news.
Any additional questions from City Council or from EDA, Planning Commission? And the PowerPoint presentation you all have, or it's a...
Yep, I handed it out to everyone, and I can put it online or email it to anyone who wants it. And, like I said, there is a lot of information. And I hope that though, that this is what I do, right? That's why I'm here, is to make sure that we're following the law, that we're doing what we're supposed to, and that we're using this to better our community. And so I just appreciate you taking the time to listen about it, and I do look forward to having some deals to bring to you in the future. As of today, I got nothing, but I'm working on it, and Jasper's helping me, and I appreciate the EDA and the planning and the CPAT and you as City Council. I just appreciate that our entire community is excited on where we can go in the future. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha. We'll now move on to our comments, reports, and items of appreciation. And Councilmember Wilkie, why don't we go ahead and start with you tonight? You got anything to report?
Nothing tonight.
Any upcoming meetings or any meetings that you want to attend in the last few weeks?
Upcoming meeting is, the bus committee be meeting January 10th in the Sueur here. And then I'm not sure when MRF is. Following week, is it?
January 17th, yep.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Johnson?
Just a little on the CPAT. Our comp plan action team had a meeting December 18th, and one of the questions that arose was re-clarifying what the purpose of the comp plan action team is, especially in respect to the downtown master plan and what's gonna happen with that. So I think we're doing kind of a survey of our ADA or our comp plan members, and one of the things that may come up to the city council is a request to authorize the comp plan action team to what is their responsibility in regard to, say, the downtown downtown master plan, for example. Is there a role for the compat in moving, not doing it, because the EDA will get involved and so forth, but in moving that agenda forward and making sure that stays on track? Or is that strictly a city administrator position? Or who's gonna, in respect to the downtown master plan, who's going to make sure that that moves forward in some way to see what happens? So that might be something, a discussion question we hit at our retreat. And the second part is, when is the retreat? Have we talked about when that might be?
January 27th,
January 27th.
from 9 to 3:30. 9 to 3:30 on the 27th. Firehouse, you,
Correct, yep, Fair Hall.
okay. Councilmember Huntington,
I've got nothing.
Councilmember Roloff,
I don't have anything.
okay. Councilmember Krogman.
Nothing.
Again, I'd just like to go ahead and wish all of our residents a Happy New Year, and it's been a very educational first year as the mayor, and for maybe our new city council members as well. We strive to do the best that we possibly can. Our lines of communication are always open. If you have anything to go ahead and share, please don't hesitate to get in touch with any of us. And I'd also like to give a shout out to our city administrator and for the wonderful work that he's done these last 6 months, and thank you. We got a lot more to do, but we're making some really good progress. And with that, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Have a great week, everybody. So we can turn these off? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. It's a recycled piece of, I don't know, garment, but it's a really, really simple design. It's actually a rectangle with a really large hole here and a smaller hole here and a couple.
Looking at that, thinking, is she cold? Does she have short sleeves that she's pulled out? Or?
I considered getting my coat up. Well, at least I'll stay awake, right? Hi, Mark. Good, how are you? They're good. That's cool. We just got through a whole round of nasty colds in our house. Yeah.
I'm just starting my third batch.
Really?
That's what I get for spending 2 days with the grandkids
Yep.
at Christmas.
Yep, that's exactly where ours came from. Little ones.
How's that aerial thing going?
It's good, yeah. We just added a space for pole fitness and we offer new classes for an extra class for self-study. Yeah,
That's awesome.
some conditioning and technique courses and, hi Scott. So, yeah, it's expanding. It's going well.
Yeah, I get your invitations for those, when you just show whatever it is.
Yeah.
One of these, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna buy it.
The student showcases are a lot of fun. It's amazing what they can do after.
Cause I know a church up in Lakeville.
Yeah.
Oh, some kind of road pole where it said, I wish the camera would shake, the camera looks like it's scared of the, they won't come to California. Probably a common joke.
school again for everything.
Oh, you're welcome. Hope your wallet search works out for you.
We'll get there. I got the important steps already in process right now, so.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah. I don't wish that upon anybody. Why?
Well, I keep thinking, just think what could go wrong cyber attack wise.
Oh, listen.
That would be crashed your factory computer and froze all of your functioning on the computer. It stole personal data and I stole personal data and I